Hey guys, how's it going? I'm David Harrington, one of the Corel Painter 2016 Masters, and I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite painting brushes and some basic painting techniques in Corel Painter for today's video. So I'm going to start off with my absolute favorite painting brush in Painter, and it's called Digital Water. Now this brush is super versatile, pretty amazing. It's just really cool. You can use it for a lot of different things. My professor at Cal State Fullerton, Cliff Cramp, showed me this brush, and he was super into it at the time, and then once he showed it to me, I became super into it. So I've been using this brush for almost like 10 years now. So that's pretty cool. But what it does is it's kind of like traditional watercolor, but the cool part is that you can dry it whenever. You can dry it just kind of like at the click of a button. And I actually bind my dry digital water function to F5 so I can just hit it whenever I want to, and that makes for really quick iterations when I'm doing concepts. So if I go ahead and hit F5 again, it has now dried that layer of digital water, and now I can go back. I haven't changed the color or anything or the value, but now I can go back in and layer a second layer on top of the first layer, which can give it a little bit of kind of like an ambient shadow effect. And this is really good for when you're doing stuff like ambient occlusion or soft shadows, any kind of lighting on like a foggy or cloudy day. This brush can be really useful for that kind of thing. And one of the really cool things about this brush is that the more I layer it, the more you start to see it pick up the texture of the paper that I have selected. So I've got my papers palette open over here, and I've got kind of this watercolor paper selected. And you can kind of see as I push the paint around that this texture is coming through, and it's really cool because the more layers I put down, the more texture I'm going to get. And because I use this brush as kind of like my base painting layer, I can start my paintings with a lot of kind of base texture, which is cool. This brush also has kind of like a color variability to it, so it'll put down not just the color you have selected, but kind of like some of the similar colors around it. So you can kind of see here that it went from kind of like a dull blue-gray to a little bit more of a warm gray, and that's without me doing anything. It just kind of does that, and it gives it more of a natural paint kind of feel, because normal paint in real life kind of does that. It's not 100% one color. It's a kind of a multitude of very similar colors. That's pretty cool. So I haven't even changed my color yet. I'm kind of just using this kind of dull, cool gray. I like kind of working from desaturated to saturated when I paint. So I'm kind of just blocking in some of the ambient light that would naturally occlude around some of these forms. That's a lot of fun. So now I can kind of pick some color, so I'll dry that layer. I can lay down some color on top of that. Now, usually when I use this brush, I'm pretty careful not to go too saturated too fast, because the colors mix together with whatever's underneath it. So I'll kind of work in some other color here. And it's kind of like glazing. I use this brush like glazing a lot. I really like when I paint traditionally, especially with watercolor. I love glazing. Paint slowly onto the canvas or the paper. I usually use paper when I'm using watercolor. Dry that. Put a little bit more down. Cool. So I'm liking where that's going so far. So now I can kind of decide if I want to work in a little bit more, a couple different maybe colors into the metal of this ship thing here. Go with some cooler panels. That's such a fun thing to do with sci-fi designs, is that you have all these different panels around, and you can kind of separate them out with different color, like slightly different color materials, or slightly different color, or slightly different valued tones. And you'll notice that when you use this brush, it has a really kind of convincing watercolor look to it. And I think the reason is because of this wet fringe that happens. So when I put it down, you can see that it gets dark around the edge. So not only am I getting texture from the paper, I'm also getting this kind of like realistic wet fringe. There's a setting up here for that. I have it set to 100%. You can turn that off, and it'll become invisible, so you don't have that. But I really like the wet fringe because it gives it that kind of convincing watercolor look. And as you layer it up, it just builds on itself more and more. That's pretty neat. So as I'm kind of working in some ambient light here, I'm not super concerned with like staying inside the lines or anything like that. I'm just kind of feeling out some of the ambient light on these forms and the way that they're attached to each other. And I don't just do ambient light typically for like a finished piece, but I like to start with the ambient light because it's kind of like the most descriptive form of lighting. That's why you see a lot of 3D modelers render their models just with like ambient occlusion, which is soft light, because it becomes like a very descriptive way to present your highly detailed work. And now I'm going to just kind of glaze a few different colors into this ship. The water's really cool for glazing things. You can get some color variation in some of the stuff, so that it's not so static, and you get little pops of color here and there. So that's working for now. Yeah, so now I'll kind of add a little bit of atmosphere with the digital water. I'll kind of knock everything down to more of a mid-tone. Kind of compare it to my original drawing there. So that's pretty cool. I'll make the back here a little bit darker. So the reason I kind of do this, and I'll kind of knock everything down to a mid-tone or a little bit darker of a tone, is because I like to set up my key light. I usually have a key light in my lighting setup, and I like to set it up on its own layer. And if it's not dark enough, you're not going to really get much effect from your key light. So everything kind of has to be knocked down a little bit to really feel the effect of the main light source in the piece. So when I set up my key light, I use a pretty unconventional painting technique. I haven't really seen too many people use it. But I actually use the glow tool in Painter to create a key light. And this is not something you can really do with traditional paint. Go ahead and dry that layer. But it is, yeah, it's pretty much just a digital technique. But I really like it because it gives me a lot of control over my lighting information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that layer. So now I've got two of the same thing sitting on top of each other. And then I'm going to take the glow tool, which is another brush and painter that is really powerful. And this brush, you can kind of see it creates a glow wherever you're pressing. Then I'm going to kind of decide what color my light source is going to be. I'll go with kind of a warmer light source for now. And I'll say the light is coming, the light's kind of coming from, let's see here. So it's kind of coming from this direction. I like to use a lighting arrow sometimes, because it kind of keeps me honest, so I don't forget where my light source is coming. You know, let's kind of tilt that this way. I'm kind of calculating the shadows in my head, and I'm kind of seeing some stuff that's not so desirable. That'll work. I can kind of do something like that. Okay. So I'm going to take my glow tool. I'm going to take a very dark tone, and I'm going to kind of blast that surface with that color on the top layer. So my light is coming from this guy. It's hitting the surface here. It'll hit some of these surfaces. It'll definitely hit this window up here. It's going to strike pretty much all this stuff in here. So I'm going pretty crazy with it, pretty blown out, but as it's on its own layer, it doesn't matter. So I'm then going to create a layer mask, use my fine point pen tool on the layer mask. I'm going to mask everything out. It's going to get rid of all of it. And then I'm going to mask back in the areas that are being affected by this light. So any of these top planes that are perpendicular to the directional light will take some lighting. These planes, this top plane here, will take some lighting. This window. And I'm doing all this using this layer mask over here so that I can turn the light on and off and kind of see the effect of that light and how accurately I'm rendering the lighting information onto the surface. So I'll use black to mask out and white to mask in. And sometimes I'll actually kind of use a darker, a little bit less than white, so that I'm not completely blowing out that top surface. And then I'll go back in with the white later and hit the highlights. So the top of this is going to get a little light. Top here. Top of this thing. And I can also use any of my blenders in the mask. So I've got my grainy water blender out, and I can use that on these kind of curved surfaces to kind of make a nice gradient where the surface is bending away from the light. And that is something that's really cool in Painter, is that you can use those blenders inside of the mask. That can be kind of a powerful feature that you can kind of do a lot with if you experiment with it. When I found out you could do that, I was kind of blown away, and that's kind of why I actually started using this technique for doing my lighting. It's because I found the layer masking system to be so versatile. I didn't realize you could work your light source kind of back and forth, which is pretty cool. So, adding a little bit of that top light here. Probably, yeah, this is going to get hit for sure. I'm not super concerned with 100% accuracy on this initial lighting pass. I just want the big picture stuff. Kind of what's in light, what's in shadow, major forms. Not necessarily super concerned with the smaller details getting lost at this point, because there will be a time and a place to kind of come back and readdress the smaller details that got lost early on. So it's coming along. Let's clean up this back edge. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll flip my my image around to make sure my lighting is correct. But I think before I do that, I'm going to clean that up a bit. Layer. I'm going to combine those two layers together. So my mask is gone, everything is now opaque. I'm going to flip my canvas around and see how that looks. So that's looking pretty okay for now. The next brush I like to use a lot is this fine point pen. This is probably one of the brushes I use the most in Painter. I use it a lot for drawing. I do almost all my drawing with that brush. It's really nifty for that kind of thing. But I also use it a lot for painting. I used to use a lot of the oil paint brushes for painting, but I really like the hard edge this brush gives me. It's like unmatched in any other program. where the hard edge of this brush is very, it's like very smooth, it's very agile, it's, I don't really know how to describe it, the way it feels, other than it just kind of feels right. And I use this in combination a lot with my grainy water blender. So you can see that brush there, which is the pen brush, and then the grainy water blender will blend out all that hard edgeness, all that hard edged goodness. So the combination of those two brushes can give me a very soft feel and a very hard feel, all while retaining a lot of texture from the paper underneath. And that's one of the real reasons I prefer Painter over other software, is that paper palette and the texturing system that it allows for. Is it always, like a lot of other software, feels like it's kind of fighting you. If you want to keep texture in your painting, it wants to naturally go to like some kind of plastic, synthetic look, where Painter really effortlessly keeps texture. It keeps your paint feeling like a painting. It keeps that tactile nature of painting alive in a digital medium, and that's what I love about it. It's a, you know, it's an artist's first mentality. It's not a photo editing program. It's a painting program, for sure. And that's why I feel it's such a successful software. And every version of Painter that's come out, that I've used, has been an improvement. It's always getting better. It's always becoming faster and more efficient. Some of the new brushes are just incredible. One of the other brushes I use a lot, it's kind of a newer brush, is this pinch brush. It's a distortion brush that's up here under distortion. This distortion category has a lot of crazy stuff in it, but the pinch brush is a distortion brush that is super useful. It can be used to really help define your edges. So you can see, if I use it right here, you can just smash out that line art there into an edge. It'll just convert that whole thing into an edge, and it pinches all the pixels, or all the paint in that area, into a super sharp edge. So you'll see me use this a lot when I'm painting kind of hard surface stuff, or anything where I want a really crisp, fine edge. Like right here, I'll use that pinch brush, and it just adds like that super hard edge. Gives you a lot of control over your edges. Yeah, so that's coming along pretty good. You'll notice I use that hard edge pen brush a lot to kind of lay stuff down, and then I'll use that grainy water to kind of bring it back out, and then that texture that it lays down because of the paper, it just, I don't know, it just adds so much. It kind of tricks your mind into thinking there's a lot of detail there, when really it's nothing. It's just kind of the trickery of the brush. That's pretty neat. Go back in with my pinch brush, kind of tighten some of these edges that are getting a little bit sloppy. Make those just kind of like razor sharp. Cool. The pinch brush is very finicky. You have to be very careful when you use that brush because it can get really wobbly really fast. So like if I am not careful, it can easily start to distort my painting. But that can also be its benefit too, is that it is so powerful. If you make it huge, it will just pull all that stuff into one point, like a vortex. Really crazy brush. Something I like to use very sparingly, but also very, very powerful and can be useful in the right situations. Glow tool I'm just putting little red marks of paint down there where I want the lights to be, but then I'll use the glow tool to really pop those out. So let's see that in just a second. I don't want to put too many lights down here, otherwise it'll start looking like a Christmas tree or something. That should be enough. So I'll grab the glow tool. Very dark red color, and I can start to use that to blast out that glowing effect. A lot of times little lights like this, I don't like to just put it over the whole thing. I like to put it towards the center, towards one side, to kind of make it look like there's like an LED light under that panel that's lighting the whole thing up, but it's stronger towards one section where the actual light is. So that's working pretty well. And the glow tool can also can add that kind of light beam that would be coming out if it was really atmospheric out, really kind of foggy. It's cool. Another trick I use a lot, do this lighten, to lighten my line art a little bit. Kind of pick the color that's pretty close to the darkest line that I have, and then start to kind of lighten that up as I paint. So the line art is still there, but it's just kind of softened a bit, so it's not overpowering the solid forms I'm trying to create. Kind of go through and soften all that stuff. That's pretty cool. So once those lines are kind of softened up, it kind of allows me to start painting a little bit more aggressively. Start using the values to define shapes rather than the lines. Yeah, I did a lot. So now I can start to go in and kind of define those edges a little bit more. So all this stuff that I'm doing right now, I'm actually doing with that fine point pen tool, or brush. I really like that one a lot. so versatile. You can really do almost anything with it. It's really, really neat. It's one of those brushes, I don't know why it's so good. It just is that good. It's hard to explain it. Here again, using that glow tool to kind of create some subsurface scattering in the window there. It's really good for that kind of thing. Anything involving kind of like incandescence, or glow, or self-illumination. Glow tool does a really good job of simulating that. Cool, so that's pretty much as far as I'm going to go in this presentation. This is really more about just kind of showing you the brushes that I like to use. See if you guys want to try to experiment with them a bit. Maybe come up with some different uses for them. And you can show me what you would do with them. But like most of the brushes in Painter, I typically tend to find a way to use them for something they were never designed for. So I used the glow tool in ways it wasn't probably designed for. I used this pen tool, I'm sure, ways that it was never designed for. So it's always funny to see what artists kind of come up with as far as creative ways to use tools. Cool. So I'm also going to be doing a tutorial on kind of doing some concept design and some content creation, brainstorming. That'll probably be the next video I do. So definitely check those out. I think that's pretty much going to be it for this little demo. So that's not too bad. Thank you.